Firstly, Shavua Tov to everybody.
Shavua Tov, guys.
Shavua Tov. Okay. Everybody, okay. So this, I'm going to say the first name for Reina Batshana, Shifra Simcha Bat Yeta, and other Cholim of Klal Yisrael. Sheaf making, and the next malacha.
Okay.
Prohibition, gathering products together in place of growth, gathering fruit which has fallen from a tree, making a string of figs, stringing together pearls, making a bouquet of flowers, and producing sea salt by evaporating seawater. If a food becomes scattered outdoors, other than in its place of growth, it may be gathered in small amounts. This applies, of course, only where the malaka of carrying does not take place in an Eruv, or a Reshut, a Yachid, a private domain. If food becomes dispersed indoors, it may be picked up in the normal way. This malaka applies only to produce which grows from the ground. One is permitted to gather man-made items if the activity is a requirement of the day. For example, collecting sidurim in a synagogue or picking up toys in order to tidy up. So this only applies outdoors, basically. You can pick up whatever you want in your own home or in your garden. It's not as long as it's not in the public domain, where you may carry it.
Interesting to know.
Okay. Good.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thanks, Kev.
It's called sheaf making. Okay.
Sheaf. Okay. All right. So one thing I wanted to address for you guys with an Arthur, because I know Arthur needed to go get bread, is that the one thing I like about being Dati Arthur and the rest of the guys is that sometimes we don't live in the black and white, we live in the gray. And sometimes I understand the Haredi point of view that you don't want to expose yourself to movies that are unclean, etc. But I also get a lot of inspiration from movies. I was watching a movie called Sully with Tom Hanks. And it was the story Sully was actually about Chesley Sullenberger. So what happens is he was a pilot that on the Hudson River saved a plane, and then he went under scrutiny by the aviation committee for not following protocol and crashing the plane. Basically, the insurance company didn't really want to pay out properly, and then they wanted a scapegoat. So Sullinger was the one that they made the scapegoat, and it was a very good movie if you get to see it, about how he saved these people's lives and his humility. The one thing that he said that was very interesting, and I thought about this, is that he said, look, at the end of the day, all of our aviation rules that we know have been determined by history of flights. We get this little black box. Now, by the way, guys, this black box was developed after the Comet 1. Now, the Comet 1 was a plane that kept crashing in midair. Why did it crash in midair? They didn't realize that the planes itself had square windows in the old days. And then you had these hairline cracks. And what happened is that created fractional damage within the fuselage lodgings, etc., and it expanded to the whole plane. And then these planes would crash midair. And after they investigated it, they decided to create this impenetrable black box. It's a small black box that records basically all the data within the plane, as well as the conversations from the pilots and co-pilots, etc. My question has always been, why don't they make the rest of the plane from that material so it wouldn't crash? But anyway, so that's a non-aviation perspective. But the reality is that black box has taught us, Chesley Sullenberger, the captain, said that's taught us about why planes actually crash. In the case of the Comet 1, all square window planes would have fractional damage and eventually expand to the plane. So now when you're on the plane, you see all these oval windows. But that wasn't the point he was trying to make. The point he was trying to make is as follows. The only reason that we have safety protocols today is because people died and sacrificed their lives, pilots, for the progress of others. And that all the knowledge that we have is often based on the lives and the sacrificed lives of others. And we sit here in the 21st century criticizing those before us and almost thinking that we're self-made men and that we have all this ability and knowledge, and it's us. It's a kindness from Hashem that, I was going down with my dad to Durban, and he said to me when I was a boy, these trees, that sappy trees, he said, this is an empty forest. He said, come here in your 40s or 50s, you'll see a whole forest. People 50 years ago planted a tree so you will have paper tomorrow. And can you imagine spending your life building resources for tomorrow and you will never see the fruits of it? So whenever we get in a plane or do anything, we should know people have given their lives for our safety. Safety protocol is a result of damage that's caused and sacrifices where things have gone wrong. And therefore, every bit of safety protocol, as an example, didn't come at no cost. So whatever we do, let's show an appreciation for those that have died before us and given us the quality of life that we've had.
Damon?
Yeah?
If it was a From movie, Lahavdil, it would be about the Baba Sali.
Yeah.
Dave, one other thing about aviation, what's interesting is they have little holes in the windows as well to balance the air pressure. Also stops them in the cracking. If you have a look, there's a tiny little hole drilled right
Correct.
through.
There's those insular, I've seen them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Kind of freaky,
Just smoke a cigarette through there.
It's a tiny hole, bro. It's like a 3 millimeter hole. Just to let the air pressure balance out in the plane.
All right, guys, let's quickly hit on Derech Hashem, which is very important, and then we're going to go straight into the shir. But I thought just to share this particular idea with you was something that is important. I don't know how you feel.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, man. Thank you.
You know why? Because you could have the worst day and just think that everything that we have is easy because of other people. It makes us immediately appreciate things. And I think one of the secrets to happiness is an appreciation of what we have, honestly. All right. And on that basis, we need to appreciate everything comes from Hashem. And therefore, we start Derech Hashem on verse 2, which says, it's furthermore necessary to know that God's true nature cannot be understood at all by any other being than by Hashem himself. The only thing that we know about Hashem is that he is perfect in every possible way and devoid of every conceivable deficiency. These things are known by tradition from the patriarchs and from the prophets. With the revelation at Sinai, all Israel perceived them and gained a clear grasp of their true nature. Then they taught them to their children, generation after generation, until this very day. Moshe had thus commanded them. It says in Devarim chapter 4, verse 9, you shall not forget the things that you saw with your own eyes, and you shall make them known to your children and to your children's children. Okay. So one of the things that I just wanted to mention about this particular fact is that people say, yeah, you can, I can take it. I can take the truth. I can take it if Hashem revealed himself to me. And there was a story in the Gemara. I need to find out which rabbi it was. One of the Roman legion, he wasn't the emperor. I think he was one of the senior, one of the senior politicians. Said to, I don't know if it was to Rebbe who it was. He said, listen, why can't God reveal himself to me if he wants me to believe in him? So this great rabbi turned around and he said to this Roman, a very powerful senator, he said, look, I want you to, it's about 11:30ish this morning. I want you to look directly at the sun. And I want you to look at the sun for about 4 or 5 minutes and tell me and take down notes in terms of what you see. And look at the sun. After 2 minutes, he said, what are you kidding me? I can get blind looking at the sun. He said, you can't even look at Hashem's creation for 5 minutes and you want to think you can deal with Hashem directly. He's unfathomable. What do you think? You've got the power to sustain it. You will melt away. You'll disappear. It's like throwing a candle into a burning building. It's going to just be absorbed. So we don't have the vessel or the capacity to comprehend Hashem in all his wisdom and greatness. And people don't even know, maybe like Gavin, for example, you might not know where your son is doing exactly at this moment tonight. But yet there are people that don't know what their spouse is doing in another room because they can't perceive, they're not omniscient, what somebody is doing in a different bedroom. But yet they think they can understand that they can say that there's definitely no God. In other words, they can't even perceive what's in the next room, and they don't know what isn't. Never mind what is. And they say that they're not sure if there's a God. They say it's fine if you say you're sure you're not sure. That's people that are still open to it. But people that say there is no God, how do you know what isn't until you know fully what is? And in order to know what is, do you know everything that's in the room next to you, where it is on the shelf, what it says, where the bed linen is folded over, where your books are, what it is on page 2 of that book? If you can't even know what's in the next room, how do you know what's in existence? And if you can't know what's in existence, how do you know what doesn't exist? And
Damon, that's the one reason why I got married. I don't know anything about my house.
Damon,
yeah,
wasn't it Marcus Aurelius?
Marcus Aurelius wasn't it?
Yeah.
I think he was the Roman. Marcus Aurelius became the Roman emperor, but he wasn't the Roman emperor at the time. And who was he having a discussion with? Was it Rebbe? I think it was Rebbe.
Could have been, yeah.
Yeah.
That's Gavin. That's your son's favorite Roman emperor.
Dan,
Gavin.
Dan, what do you call a woman who always knows where her husband is?
A widow.
Yeah.
All right.
That's about it.
All right, guys, I'm going to send a new link.
Gavin, you got that one, eh?
No, I enjoyed that. I'm a Cohen as well, so I really respect that show.
Send a new link.
Your son's.
I should have done it in the first link. I'm sorry. Still learning. All right. The Gemara examines Rabbi Meir's ruling. Okay. Just to summarize, with whom does the first segment of our Mishnah accord? It's not in accord with Rabbi Yishmael, and it is not in accord with Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara explains, for according to Rabbi Yishmael, who said that the victims are creditors of the Tam's owner, this ruling of he who was damaged later benefits is incorrect. What the Mishnah should have said, he who was damaged earlier benefits. So that's to say, guys, if those who incurred damage are seen as creditors of the damager, their claim should be settled in the order that they occurred. For the claim of an earlier creditor generally takes precedence to that of a later creditor. But the Mishnah gives precedence to those who were damaged later. Clearly, it does not regard the victims as creditors, thus it does not accord with Rabbi Yishmael. And according to Rabbi Akiva, who said that the damaged parties are partners with the damager in the oxat gourd, the ruling of the oxat gourd is worth more than the half payment. The excess is returned to the owner of the one that came before this one is incorrect. Instead, the Mishnah should have said, it is returned to all of them. In other words, if each person who incurred the damage became a partial owner of the oxat gourd, the excess should be divided among all of them. Since the Mishnah gives precedence to those who were damaged later, it clearly does not regard the victims as partners of the ox. So what we're saying is, guys, very, very simply, is that according to Rabbi Meir's explanation of the Mishnah, Kevin, what happens is the last person gets paid. Then if there's any money left, the second last to last gets paid. And if there's any money, the third to last. And we're saying this doesn't run in accord with Rabbi Akiva. Why? Very simply. Is the last one we understand he got paid first because he was at least, he was at least not damaging any further. So we know what his payment is. But according to the fact that partners are representational according to the amount of damages they were awarded, and the percentiles of partnership are differ, each one, if there's excess money, should be paid to some sort of contribution towards the damage they incurred from previous damages. So therefore, since essentially what happens is the last one gets damaged, then the second one, then the last one gets paid in his half payment damages, and if there's anything left over, second to last gets paid, third to last. And what we are saying is that if from the last person damaged, he gets his full half payment damages for the time, say he's owed 100 zuz, and just say his ox that damaged the last one, well, maybe it was a 50 zuz worth of damage, and therefore Gavin is owed only 25 zuz. Let's just take an example like that. So then there's 25 zuz he gets, but then there's another 75 zuz worth of payments outstanding. It should then be distributed amongst the other damaged parties according to what they owed in their shares, because they become partners as victims in the share of that ox of what they have in stake. Okay, so we're saying that for sure, according to Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Meir's Mishnah doesn't work out, because the second to last gets paid. What about the third to last damages or the fourth to last damage party? They should all get something, even if there's not enough to go around. They should at least get something, because they themselves have been damaged. All right, at that point we ended. Let's carry on from this point. Okay, so Rava has an answer when we go back to the Mishnah's first segment. Okay, so what was this case of Rabbi Meir? That the last person gets paid, then the second to last, then third to last, etc. So we're saying, according to Rabbi Yishmael, what is the problem? Well, the problem is very clearly that according to Rabbi Yishmael, what happens is the court appearance has to occur, but in the order at which they were damaged, that's the order that they should be paid. First person damaged gets paid first, second gets paid second, and tralala, not the last gets paid. So Rava said, listen, I really have a solution to what the Mishnah is saying here. It's not arguing with Rabbi Yishmael, because Rabbi Meir seems to be arguing with Rabbi Yishmael by saying that the last person gets paid first, whereas Rabbi Yishmael said whoever gets damaged first gets paid first, and so on and so forth. Saying, look, Rava said really the Mishnah is in accord with Rabbi Yishmael, who said that the damaged parties are creditors of the Tam's owner, and that which you asked, that instead of saying he who was damaged later benefits, the Mishnah should have said he was damaged earlier benefits. The answer is as follows. With what are we dealing here in the Mishnah? We are dealing with the case where each successive victim seized the ox that gore to collect damages from it, and thereby became like a paid custodian over it with regards to liability for its further acts of damage. So what we are saying is here, let's use an example. Gavin owns the ox originally, and now it goes my ox, and there's 100 zuz. My ox is worth 200 zuz dead. I should, by all means, if it was a Muad ox, get 200 zuz from choice property, but it's a Tam ox, and therefore Gavin owes me 100 zuz up to the body of the damaging animal. Now, I'm worried that Gavin might say his ox ran away. Why? Because Gavin doesn't want to pay me, and he might end up asking his cousin to look after the ox, because all oxes look the same. And then in 6 months' time, he sells it to the local butcher before I've got a chance to collect it. So I might not trust the original owner that I'm going to get the money. And therefore, I seize the ox as the first victim. What happens is, in my care, I'm awarded 100 zuz. Okay? Let me just put it like that. I'm awarded 100 zuz. But in my care, I have to look after the ox. We're going to see why the third victim gets paid first. That's a different discussion. But in principle, let's just work it linear forwards, first damage to last, rather. As the custodian of the ox, I have to look after it. Now, if the ox in my care damages Kevin, and Kevin had an ox with 200 zuz, and that ox is dead, I owe Kevin 100 zuz. Now, what we're basically saying is that the reason that I have to pay is that once I kidnap the ox before it goes to trial, it hasn't been awarded to me yet. We're not partners, Gavin and I. Gavin has no reason to pay part of my negligence towards Kevin. It has nothing to do, according to Rabbi Yishmael, with negligence of Gavin as the original owner. Gavin paid me, fine. Or Gavin owes me, fine, and he'll pay me. But now I owe Kevin. Why do I owe Kevin? Because in my care it damaged. Therefore, I'm a paid custodian, and therefore anything under my care I'm responsible for. What do we mean? Gavin asked me, Gavin has to go down to Cape Town. Say, Gavin goes down to Cape Town. And he said, Dave, look after my place, and while he's away, I have a joint, and I get nice and relaxed, and I set alight his bed linen and his house, and that's the end of Gavin's house. And he said, listen, I paid you 1,000 rand to look after my house. You're responsible to replace things. I'm a paid custodian. Okay? And therefore, why am I seen as a paid custodian here? Very simple. But when I seize the ox, I'm going to get paid first. It doesn't matter how many other damages there are or creditors. Possession is 9/10 of the law. So what is my payment? Is using the ox as collateral in order to get paid what I'm owed. And therefore, I'm seen as a paid custodian. That's why the Gemara is using the term paid custodian. But the Gemara also wants to add, even according to Rashi, the Meforshim, that even a non-paid custodian is responsible for damage. Again, we used this example. I'm going on a hot date. I want to impress this girl. I borrow a convertible car from Kevin to take this chick on a hot date. I have a couple of drinks. I write off the car. Now, Kevin never paid me to look after his car, but Kevin did me the biggest favor in the world. And why should he take a loss, even if I wasn't paid to look after his car? In fact, Kevin did me the favor. Even more so, I should pay for the damage I caused to Kevin's car. I'm the custodian for the car for that night. I had no business drinking. Therefore, any damage caused, I pay to Kevin. Now that I've seized the ox, it's not Gavin's responsibility as the original owner, because he's going to pay me 100 zuz. But I could have smoked that profit up. Why? Because the 100 zuz that I was awarded from Gavin, because his ox was worth 200 zuz. My dead ox is worth 200 zuz. Tom ox, he only owes me 100 zuz to the value of the attacking animal. Okay? Now, according to which I gained 100 zuz from Gavin. Then I owe 100 zuz to Kevin. Why? Because under my care, I killed Kevin's ox worth 200 zuz. And now I owe Kevin 100 zuz. So whatever profit I would have made from being paid out from Gavin, I've lost now to pay out Kevin because of my negligence. And it's a custodian issue. When the custodian is negligent, he has to pay to the next party. It has nothing to do with the original owner. Okay? And what Rav is saying is, listen, Rabbi Meir's Mishnah is absolutely in accord with Rav Yishmael. The reason why the last one gets paid, firstly, is because he hasn't damaged anybody. But let's just say it's second to last or third to last kidnaps the ox. It's not a going against Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael just says generally the pattern is the first to get damaged is the first to get paid. The creditor, the first person you loan money to is the first person that has you have to pay back. But we've learned that possession is stronger than a chronological preferencing. Does that make sense? So even if the first one borrows you money first, or the first one you damage first, if the second one seizes the ox, he's got the collateral in order to collect first. That's what Rava is saying. It's not in disagreement with Rav Yishmael. Rabbi Meir is purely saying whoever seizes the ox for collateral has a responsibility now to look after it. And therefore it's in accord with Rabbi Yishmael. Let's go on. Okay. So, by seizing the ox, the victim becomes responsible to keep it from damaging others. Since he failed in his responsibility, he forfeits his rights in the ox to the one that damaged through negligence. The cycle repeats itself when the second victim seizes the ox. When he allows it to damage again, he pays for the damage by forfeiting the rights to the third victim. Thus, the one who damaged last is the one to receive compensation. Now, what I want to mention to you on this particular issue is it's not automatic that the person forfeits all their money to the next victim. The game was rigged here. The game was set up. What was the game? It was attacking ox worth 200 zuz, victim ox worth 200 zuz. And every successive victim in this example by Rabbi Meir sustained damage of 100 zuz. Does that make sense? And because he sustained damage of 100 zuz, if I was awarded for my 200 zuz dead ox, 100 zuz from Gavin for a ton payment, and now Kevin's ox is also worth 200 zuz, and in that case, he's got a dead ox. I owe him 100 zuz for a ton that's in my custody. I lose the 100 I collected from Gavin because I have to forfeit it and pay it over to Gavin. But you mustn't mistake the fact that you automatically forfeit whatever you collected to the next party. It's only in this example, when they've made it homogeneous, that the amount of every successive victim is getting awarded 100 zuz, based on their dead ox being worth 200 zuz. And it's done that to teach a principle, because if you have a variant, it's going to confuse everybody. Okay, now I'm going to use examples of other amounts and show you how it really does work out. That's what the diagrams are for. But unless we get the clear understanding of the concept with a homogeneous amount, we will never get the clear understanding when the variant takes place. Agreed, guys? Okay, good. So let's move on. So what we're saying is, yeah. So the Gemara asks a very good question. If so, that the Mishnah speaks of where the victim sees the ox that gored, then it's ruling of if the ox that gored is worth more than the half payment. In other words, the excess is returned to the owner of the one that came before this one. In other words, the second to last ox that was gored is incorrect. Instead, the Mishnah should have said it is returned to the original owner. So what's the hang-up that the Gemara has with this point? It's saying, look, Gavin is the original owner. Fine? Gavin's ox was worth 200 zuz, and it gored my ox, killed it dead, and he owes me 200 zuz if it was more, but because it's a tum, he owes me 100 zuz. So Gavin then pays me 100 zuz, okay, according to Rabbi Yishmael. Now my ox then destroys Kevin's ox, and I owe Kevin 100 zuz. So the thing of it is, let's take a variant here. Let's say Kevin's ox is only worth 80 zuz. Okay, no. Hang on. Let's say it's fine. Kevin's ox is worth 200 zuz. He's got 100 zuz worth of damage. I pay my 100 zuz that I got from Gavin to Kevin. Kevin's got 100 zuz. Then Arthur's next as the victim. And now Arthur's ox is only worth 80 zuz. And therefore, the time payment that Kevin owes Arthur is what? 40 zuz, right? 40 zuz. So now, what happens is, basically, Kevin owes Arthur 40 zuz. But there is a 60 zuz remaining of value. Does Kevin get it or I get it? So this is going to sound initially confusing, and I'm going to clear it up with diagrams. All it's saying at this point that you've got to know is that Gavin's money remains intact. The Gemara is saying that the problem is if there's any excess money and you pay the last one first because Arthur hasn't created any further damage with his ox. And in other words, you're taking Gavin's money. Let's just take it like this. Say before the trial, according to Rabbi Yishmael, nobody's been paid yet. Okay? And then we go to trial and there's Gavin as the original owner. Okay? Then there's me as the first victim. There's Kevin as the second victim and Arthur as the third victim. Are you with me? And then we go to trial. The court's going to say that that money has to be awarded. If we have a look here, it has to technically be awarded that 100 zuz, even though it should come to me because I sustain 100 zuz worth of damage, that 100 zuz goes all the way to Arthur's side. It gets paid the last one first because that's the clearest case. Because remember, Rabbi Yishmael only pays upon, court process, Gavin. Do you remember that? So it's saying that you owe me 100, but you don't pay it to me because there's now, I was the custodian, I seized the ox. Then Kevin seized it from me. Then Arthur seized it from Kevin. Arthur was the only one that was careful. So we're saying, look, Gavin only created 100 zuz worth of damage as the original owner. And since he was the original owner, he keeps his 100 zuz, no problem. He keeps his 100 zuz. But that 100 zuz worth of damage that he was meant to pay to me goes backwards. It goes to Arthur. And Arthur now is only entitled to 40 zuz for his 100 zuz ox. So Arthur gets 40 zuz. Then that extra 60 zuz goes down to Kevin. Now, Kevin sustained 100 zuz worth of damage for me. Okay? So Kevin keeps the 60 zuz and I get nothing. Why do I get nothing? Well, I should have been more careful. But what the Gemara is saying, hang on a second. the Gemara's objection was, do we take Gavin's 200 zuz worth of full damage and then pay it where that 200 zuz goes from the end point where Arthur gets his 40 zuz, okay, then there's 160 zuz remaining. Then basically Kevin gets his 100 zuz, then I get 60 zuz, and Gavin ends up with nothing. The Gemara says this isn't fair. And the Gemara says that's 100% right. It's not fair. So Gavin doesn't lose anything as the original owner other than what he damaged me for the total for everybody. Does that make sense? So if, for example, Gavin only damaged me and cost me 80 zuz and pays me 40 zuz, and I, out of negligence, let it damage Kevin and Arthur, you two guys might have a problem because Gavin's not entitled to lose anything more than his negligence value at all. That's what we're saying. That's not Gavin's responsibility to lose anything more than his negligence share. He's paid his dues. He's not a partner in the ox. According to Rabbi Akiva, he's a partner in the ox and he keeps paying. According to Rabbi Yishmael, he doesn't. He pays me for his negligence. I kidnapped it as a custodian, and so it goes, and so it goes. So your question that you might be asking, guys, is why don't we work it forwards instead of backwards? Why don't we work it where in the court order of trial, Gavin pays me, I pay Kevin, and Kevin pays Arthur in the order at which the damage was caused? Isn't that a fair question? Yes, Kevin.
If Arthur, okay, so the ox is worth 80, the damaging ox. So
no. The damaging ox is always worth 200 in these examples. I'm saying the damage sustained by Arthur's ox was worth 80, and therefore, so because 40. It's a ton, he gets 40.
But where's the other 60 come from? You said that someone else is going to get paid the 60.
I'll tell you where it comes from. Because the original owner, Gavin, damaged me for 100 zuz. So Gavin owes that 100 zuz. So now it goes to the end. And we work it backwards.
If like in a pool, it gets pooled. It gets put into like the pool. It gets,
yeah, but it comes from the end. Now, the realistic question is, why does it come from the end? Okay, in other words, why don't I get paid first? And if there's anything left from my negligence, Kevin gets paid and Arthur gets paid, etc. Why doesn't it work that way? Okay, which is a valid question. So the reality is there might be many, many different answers above my pay grade and above my experience. The one answer that we can deduce very clearly from the Gemara is simple. It's that Arthur was the only one that really deserves full payment as the last victim, because he was the only one that was careful out of all of us that his ox didn't damage anybody else when he seized the ox. And as the custodian, he was responsible. Therefore, he's given first priority. And if there's anything left over, according to Rav Yishmael, then there'd be a second to last victim and third to last victim. But sometimes the third to last victim gets paid, but not the second to last. I'm going to unravel it now as to why, but as long as you can follow this logic so far. Okay, and so far it makes absolute sense, guys. Okay, so let me just confirm. So the Gemara questions, if so that the Mishnah speaks of where the victim sees the ox that gored, then its ruling of the ox that gored is worth more than the half payment. The excess is returned to the one that came before this one. In other words, the second to last one that was gored was incorrect. Instead, the Mishnah should have said it is returned to the original owner. So what we're saying is that out of the 200 zuz that Gavin's ox is worth, why is it that Gavin must suffer by losing that full 200 zuz? Because it implies if there's anything extra from that 200 zuz, that it gets distributed along the chain of damaged parties. And the Gemara comes to answer not so. Gavin only owes what he owed to me within his realm of responsibility. If there's anything left over from what he owed me, which gets paid to the last victim first, because he was the only responsible one, then we have the trickle-down theory where Kevin might get something and I might get something. But Gavin doesn't get penalized past his point of responsibility. That's all you should know. All right, just one. So then we're concluding and saying, to resolve this difficulty, the Gemara redefines the Mishnah's ruling. Ravina said, This is what the Mishnah is teaching. If it is more, what does this mean? If his damages, the damages of the second to last victim, are more than the damages owed to the final victim, the excess is returned to the one that came before this one. In other words, the owner of the second to last ox. When the Mishnah says if it is more, it does not refer to the value of the ox that bought, meaning it's not referred to as Gavin's 400 zuz ox, but to the damages of the second to last victim. The Mishnah is saying that the payment due to the last victim is less than what is due to the second last one. Then the second last victim receives what remains of the original payment. The owner, however, retains his portion. So what we are saying exactly that is that if Arthur, as the last custodian who gets paid first because he was the only careful one, is owed 80 zuz, but at a time he gets paid 40 zuz. Now there's anything left from the 100 zuz that Gavin originally owed me, which goes all the way first to Arthur priority. Why? Because Arthur was careful. If there's anything left, then we say that great, Kevin gains, and if there's anything left, I might gain. But there is another complicated factor, which doesn't affect Gavin, by the way. Gavin only pays the damage which it caused me, which goes into the whole kitty at the end and goes getting paid last one first, Arthur. So Gavin, you're good, man. According to Rav Ishmael, you've been good. You don't want to have it according to Rabbi Akiva, where you're the partner and you keep being paying off. Does that make sense? So there's
you're paying for other people's negligence.
Yes, but there's a reason that Rabbi Akiva says it too. Well, the beauty of Gemara is finding the genius in Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva. And then it also gets developed. So why I'm switching it like that is you were a big fan of Rabbi Akiva. And I said, you must be. But you also got to see it from Rabbi Ishmael's point of view. So now I'm going to share some charts and explain it more fully. Now, there's a question. The first chart that I'm going to give you is a bit obscure, not in terms of visuals, but in terms of a question that arises, that purposely arises, and then it's cleared up by the second chart. Am I making sense, guys? I'll explain to you because you've got to understand the nuance here. I'm going to share something. Okay, just give me a sec. All right, guys, you can see this now, right? This is in note 5 of the Schottenstein Bava Kamma, by the way. I just drew it. So Gavin's entire ox as the original owner was worth 200 zuz. Gavin damaged me, Damon, which actually, although he says the fourth to last victim, it's actually the first victim that got damaged, but it's fourth to last if you count backwards. It's first victim if you count forwards. Does that make sense, guys? Yeah. Again, Kevin, Gavin damaged my ox. I'm the first victim. You, Kevin, are the second victim. Arthur's the third victim, for example. I'm just giving you an example, okay? But we say the last victim is the one that never caused further damage because they were a careful custodian. So we refer to it as the last victim, second to last victim, third to last victim, fourth to last victim, and the original owner. But in fact, in order of chronology of damage, I was the first one damaged, then Kevin was damaged, then Arthur was damaged, etc. So let's just use this as an example. We're saying that there's 100 zuz intact for the owner, because the extra 100 zuz is awarded to the last victim down the chain. That's exactly what we're saying. Why does Gavin only have to pay 100 zuz? Because Gavin was only negligent for 200 zuz, but it's a first time offense or whatever, less than 3. He only owes me for my 200 zuz dead ox damage 100 zuz. That's Gavin's obligation for being negligent as an owner. He's paid it, but he doesn't pay it to me. It gets put by the court in the end of the process. Okay? Gavin still keeps his 100 zuz. That remains intact. Okay? Because the obligation of Gavin's obligation is to the first victim only under his care. That's all. He should have looked after his ox. Fine. That 100 zuz that he should have paid to me doesn't go to me. Why does it not go to me? Because I was negligent. When I seized the ox, I let it damage further. So I'm not entitled to first payment. Goes all the way to the end of the court, end of the last victim, when the trial unfolds. And then we say, okay, the last victim never caused further damage because he was careful with his ox. He gets paid first. So in this particular case, let's just say that the last victim sustains 50 zuz worth of damage, Kevin. Then what is he awarded? 50% of that for Tam. So he's awarded 25 zuz. So he's the first to get paid. Now there's 75 zuz left in the kitty for the second to last victim. Okay? So the second to last victim gets how many zuz?
50.
I made a mistake here. Hang on. There was 100 zuz. He gets 75 zuz. I made a mistake with my calculation.
Yeah, I'm going according to your drawing. So
yeah, it's wrong. It's wrong. I was drugged up. I'm sorry, guys. So anyway, okay, there's 100 zuz. There's 20.
Yeah. It should be. Okay, so you're saying this. I thought there'll be 20. No, aren't you right? Isn't there 25 left over for the next part?
Hang on. We're starting. There's 100 zuz that Gavin would have owed to me as the first victim. That gets held to the end of the trial. Arthur is owed 25 zuz for 50 zuz worth of damage. Okay? So then there's 75 zuz. Not 50 zuz, but Kevin doesn't get 75 zuz because he only sustained 100 zuz worth of damage. My chart's right. I'm not on drugs.
It's correct. Correct.
So sorry, Gavin. Sorry. So my chart's right. Basically, there's 100 zuz worth of damage, but because it's a Tam ox, he only gets paid 50 zuz, which means there's how many zuz left over?
25.
25 zuz. And in fact, there's 25 zuz. So the 25 zuz is awarded to the third victim, even if his damage is more, because there's no money left. So even if he's owed 100 zuz, he gets 25 zuz. That's all that's left. And if he complains, he should have looked after his ox better. If it didn't damage anybody else, he would have kept a lot more of that money. Then the fourth to last victim gets nothing as there's nothing left. Does that make sense? Fine, but there is a slight flaw to that. And that slight flaw is going to come up in the next chart. Does that make sense? There's nothing wrong with this, but it can get a little bit more complicated. I'm going to share my screen. Just give me a sec, guys. There was nothing wrong with the chart or the flaw of what I'm sharing, but you're going to see where it becomes a little bit more complicated. Okay, let me just share my chart. Okay, so let's study this now. Now, let's say Gavin's ox is worth 200 zuz, and he owes me for the damage 100 zuz, so it goes to the end of the queue. Now, let me show you why it happened, what the slight issue is that it can get more complicated. There is nothing flawed about the previous diagram, but the situation can change. So, say the last victim, Arthur, is owed 100 zuz worth of damage, but because it's a Tam incident, Arthur only gets paid 50 zuz. Why does he get paid 50 zuz? Well, it's a half payment on 100 zuz. Why does he get paid first? Because he was the only one that looked after his ox and it didn't damage further. So Arthur gets rewarded for that as the last victim. So he gets paid the proper half payment damages of 50 zuz. Right. Now, out of the 100 zuz, which Gavin originally owed me as the first victim, even though I'm the third to last victim here, I was still the first victim damaged, goes to the end of the kitty. Of that 100 zuz, Arthur gets 50 zuz. Okay, now look at where it gets complicated. If we go to the beginning of the fact, guys, we don't say that Arthur pays automatically to Kevin whatever's left, because then Kevin would get 50 zuz, right? Guys?
Yeah.
Kevin would get 50 zuz automatically from Arthur. But why does Kevin get 50 zuz? Because he's owed it technically from from the remaining payment. But he doesn't get 50 zuz. Why? Because he has to pay Arthur. So instead of complicating this diagram, I'm going to make it simple. Let's work on the first to damage last, and then we work backwards. Okay, Gavin is the original owner. He caused me 200 zuz worth of damage. I'm the first victim, and here I'm known as the third to last victim. Gavin owes me only 100 zuz, right? So that full amount goes to the end. Now, Arthur is only owed 50 zuz for 100 zuz worth of damage. He gets his money. Now, what do I owe Kevin because I was negligent as the first victim? What do I owe to the second victim, which in this case is second to last? Okay? I owe what? I owe, actually, Kevin, I owe Kevin 50 zuz because his ox was worth 100 zuz. Okay? Gavin, I owe Kevin 50 zuz. But Kevin doesn't get his 50 zuz from me. Why? Because the money goes to the last one. So if there's a 50 zuz remaining that Arthur is awarded and then it goes down the line to Kevin, he loses his 50 zuz to Kevin because he was Kevin loses his 50 zuz to Arthur because he was negligent in looking after his ox. So then it comes to me that I get that 50 zuz from the last payment excess, not Kevin. That's where it gets complicated.
So now, just explain to me between this and the other drawing, why didn't that happen in the previous drawing?
Okay, because the amounts owing were different. I'm going to share the previous diagram, and I'm going to make this a
quick look. I just want to see what the difference was.
All right, class, can I ask you a favor? Can I share another link? We only need a few more minutes, but it's easier, and then we'll clear this up. Okay? Up. Thank you, Kevin. I could hug you, John. All right. So let me just explain it, and then I'll share the diagram. So the Gemara basically says, Gavin, that it's certainly true that if the ox is worth more than 100 zuz half payment, the excess goes back to the owner being you, right? But the Mishnah is saying that if the damage sustained by the last victim is less than sustained by the second to last victim, the excess is then awarded to the second to last victim. The example we did last time, not in the diagram, is I said if Arthur was the last to seize the ox and was careful, and that Kevin damaged him with 80 zuz worth of damage, but he only owes Arthur 40 zuz because it was a tam ox, then there's money left from the kitty of the 100 zuz that Gavin originally damaged me with as the first victim. So that 100 zuz, when we have the trial, 40 of it trickles to Arthur. Now there's extra balance that then gets paid to the extra victims successively. That's not shared according to percentages according to Rabbi Akiva, but we look at what the second to last victim is owed, the third to last victim, etc. Okay, so for example, if an ox belonging to the second to last victim was worth 100 zuz, making his half damage as 50 zuz, and if the ox belonging to the last victim was worth 50 zuz, making his half damage 25 zuz, the extra 25 zuz goes to the second to last victim. And then the same is true further up the chain. So if the share of the tam animal belonging to the victims is greater than the 50 zuz received by the last two victims, the excess goes to the third victim, then to the fourth to last, etc. That's according to Rashi. So the reason is obvious. Each victim is liable to the one beneath him because of custodial negligence. The only victim without liability is the last one. So he's compensated first. Once he's been paid, the victim above him becomes last in the chain and is eligible for compensation until the value of the victim's share is exhausted. So according to this understanding, the Mishnah statement of he was damaged later benefits is an absolute, right? Because obviously the last one gets paid because he was the most careful, but those preceding him might not. So for example, and I'm going to share the chart now, if the last and second to last victim are owed 50 zuz apiece, and the third to last victim is owed 100 zuz, the last victim receives 50 zuz. but the second to last receives nothing because he has to forfeit his 50 zuz to pay the 50 zuz of the last victim, and the third to last receives the 50 zuz excess. So in other words, the earlier victim, the third to last, benefits while the later one, the second to last, doesn't. So when the Mishnah says the one that was damaged later benefits, it refers to the final victim. That's according to Tosfot. So there's a slight difference in diagram, and I'm going to share it with you.
Right. It's just the numbers. The numbers are different.
No, not quite. There's a slight difference in concept, which I need to speak to Rabbi Cohen about. I'll share it with you. Okay. So in the first diagram, it seems relatively clear. Gavin, I'm going to share my screen now.
Thanks.
Okay, the first diagram seems relatively clear. Why? Because Gavin is the original owner. His ox was worth 200 zuz. I'm the first victim. Okay, I occurred in January. Gavin was negligent looking after his ox and it caused me 100 zuz worth of damage. Fine. But when I seized the ox, I was then responsible for looking after the ox in my care, and I was negligent, and it damaged Kevin's ox. Okay, and because it damaged Kevin's ox, then Arthur is not responsible for me being negligent as a custodian. Then in Kevin's care, it obviously damaged Arthur, because Arthur then was the next victim. And then Arthur in his care, for example, in this case, never looked after. So what the Gemara is saying clearly is Gavin, according to Rabbi Ishmael, only owes technically me because that was within the realm of his control. But that 100 zuz isn't paid to me first because I was negligent under my control. Therefore, it gets that total amount of money gets withheld by the court until we look at the last victim who gets paid first because he was the most careful. So in this particular example, okay, he is owed 50 zuz worth of damage, right? Say his ox was only damaged for 50 zuz and it was a Tam case, he's awarded 25 zuz. Now out of 100 zuz, the last victim gets 25 zuz. What is there remaining? 75 zuz. But why does the second to last victim not get 75 zuz? He's not entitled to make a profit on his damage. He was damaged to 100 zuz and he's only owed 50 zuz. So he gets paid his 50 zuz as owed. Then the third to last victim, there is an additional amount of 25 zuz that's awarded because that's all that there is in terms of the balance. Now, the third victim is not happy. Why? Because he might be owed 100 zuz and he only got 25 zuz. Well, guess what? He should have been more careful looking after his ox because that was all that was left when it was paid last to first. And the fourth victim gets nothing as there's nothing left. Right.
This drawing makes sense perfectly.
Okay, this drawing makes sense. There's only one slight problem, Gavin, with this drawing. This is the question. It makes sense from a logical point of view if you're taking last to first payment. But there is kind of a little bit of unfairness. What's the unfairness? Is that if I'm owed 100 zuz and Kevin's damage was only maybe 40 zuz, okay? And Kevin's damage was only like 40 zuz, and I owed him 20 zuz. Okay, then what happens if, let me put it this way, if the one after Kevin failed to look after his ox damaged a very hefty animal, then the second to last victim gets the majority. I end up getting nothing. Whereas as the first victim, I was only negligent technically to 100 zuz, which means if there's anything left from Arthur, I should, in a way, get a little bit more. We understand why the last victim gets the most, because he wasn't negligent. But the second to last victim, Kevin caused me more damage. Do you understand what I'm saying? And he was negligent. So if I only owe 20 zuz to Kevin, I'm almost sustaining more losses. Because Kevin was negligent. I'm being punished, but you not as the original owner. That's my question to Rabbi Cohen. And again, once Kevin seized it from me, I've lost my responsibility. So you've paid the 100, and I understand why I might get nothing, but I only owe Kevin 20 zuz. So just because Kevin was negligent, now I have to suffer for Kevin's negligence. Do you understand there's a slight problem with that too?
So just, sorry, because it's got confused with the names. Can you just talk first, second, last? Don't bring us up as Kevin and that. Sorry, I just wanted to see if I follow this 100%. Just go last, second, third last, and fourth last.
All right. Original owner owes first victim 200 zuz, but he only has to pay 100 zuz. So he keeps his 100 zuz as the original owner and gives 100 zuz. He should have given 100 zuz to the first victim, but he doesn't because there's subsequent victims, because the first victim wasn't careful with his ox and damaged other parties. Does that make sense? So then it's given towards the end. And what I'm saying is, just like you protected, just like the original owner is protected, where after his custodian amount, he no longer has to pay extra people. Why should I, as the first victim, if I was negligent, I understand that I forfeit maybe, if my ox caused 40 zuz worth of damage to the second victim, if I owe 20 zuz, why I might not get paid at all, because the last victim should be awarded the fully because he wasn't negligent. But my question is the third to last victim. There is the second to last victim is the problem, because the second to last victim was a hefty animal, and the second to last victim is actually the third victim, by the way. So third victim. It's the second to last that was damaged. But what I'm saying is Kevin's negligence cost me money. I understand why the last victim gets paid in full his half damages, because he wasn't negligent at all. But why Kevin being negligent on a heavy animal has cost me, when in fact that has nothing to do with me. It's just like saying you as the original owner would be responsible if I as the first victim was negligent. That's my question.
So you just to understand you correctly, you're saying that the third guy is getting screwed over. He's basically landing up with nothing, whereby he should have got, in essence, a huge chunk. I mean, he should have got his 100 in theory.
Well, I'm saying in my particular example, I, as the first damager, get messed over because I can understand why the last victim got paid in full. He didn't do anything wrong. But the one that seized the ox from me ends up taking his share in the last one. So just to keep a very complicated story simple, this is a question I'm going to bring with Rabbi Cohen. But let's leave it as is. That if the owner owes me as the first victim 100 zuz, it gets paid. It gets held to the end of the trial. The first victim gets paid what he's owed, and if there's anything left, it trickles down. Once you understand that, I'm going to share the last chart, and then we're done.
I understand the trickling down part.
Fine.
No, I can understand why it's unfair. I understand where you're coming from. I do get it.
Okay, I'm going to just share this, and then we're done.
I just wanted to see this is the one I'm curious about.
All right. So let's take an example. The original owner owes 200 zuz owns an ox worth 200 zuz. When we say third to last victim, Kevin, when we say third to last victim in this case, it's actually the first victim chronologically that got damaged. Does that make sense, Kevin?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So this is the original owner. Then he damages the first victim. The first victim wasn't careful with his ox, and it damaged the second victim. The second victim wasn't careful with his ox and damaged the third victim. Now, when that's the case, the original owner takes what he owes to the first victim, and it gets held to the end of the trial, and the last victim gets paid his half payment damages because he was the only careful one. So, for example, if the last victim was owed 100 zuz worth of damage, he gets paid half damages of 50 zuz because he doesn't lose it by having to pay out money for his negligence elsewhere. Fine. Then how much is left, guys?
50. Which
50
according to
zuz.
the coin would have gone to the second to last victim. But you're saying it doesn't.
So what I'm saying is it doesn't, because what happens is, say, for example, I, as the first victim, damaged Kevin to 100 zuz, not 200 zuz, 100 zuz. So I owe Kevin 50 zuz, right? Then because of Kevin's negligence as the second victim, he damaged Arthur, the third victim, for 100 zuz. He has to give his 50 zuz that he got from me, awarded from me, to the last victim. So what the
but I didn't know he was awarded the 50. I didn't know that.
Yes, but he's awarded the 50, but he loses it. That's what the Gemara is saying, because he pays his last 50, and it's in note number 5, by the way. He pays his last 50 that he was awarded from the first victim. That's a third to last victim. The first victim caused the second victim damage. The second victim was negligent. So I'm using us as an example because it's easier to understand. Gavin is the original owner. I haven't switched parties, Gav. You're the original owner. You damaged me for 200 zuz. You owe me 100 zuz. I was negligent when I seized your ox because I didn't trust you wouldn't sell it to your cousin. Now that I've kidnapped your ox and seized it for the court, I was negligent to Kevin, and I owed him 100 zuz worth of damage, but because the ox was tam, I should have paid Kevin 50 zuz. Okay. Now, Kevin was negligent with the ox now in his care as the second victim and damaged the third victim for 100 zuz. But because it's a tam ox, he only owes the last victim 50 zuz. So we take Gavin as the original owner's 100 zuz that he owed to me as the first victim, and we pay the last one first. So what we are saying is as follows. As Arthur's the last victim is owed 100 zuz, but because it's a tam, he gets 50 zuz. Kevin should have earned 50 zuz from me as the first victim, not looking after my ox, and Kevin was the recipient of that damage. His ox was worth 100 damage, and I should have paid him 50 zuz. But when I should have given him that 50 zuz, he now owes it to Arthur. So he loses it. Whatever he gained, he lost. So Kevin, actually, it says in the Gemara, is skipped out as the second to last victim in this case, and I get paid. Why? Because that extra 50 zuz goes to me as the third victim. I'm actually owed 100 zuz, but there's only 50 zuz remaining, so I'm going to get that. I'm still short. But Kevin doesn't deserve to get it because his ox damaged with 100 zuz, and he would have only been awarded 50 zuz from me, because his ox was also worth 100 zuz. But his damage has forfeited his money because he had to pay it over to Arthur. That's what we're saying in the...
Just go to the previous diagram again. I want to see why that principle didn't apply in the previous diagram.
The previous diagram, it never applied for one reason, is that the amount's different. Let me share.
That's what I said. The amount's different.
Let
me have a look
at the first one again. With you, Gavin. I never disagreed with you.
Just go back to the first one.
I will, but I'm saying I never disagreed with you, bud. At all.
Just want to check it again.
Can I zoom in a second?
Is this the first one or the second drawing?
No, just hang on a second. No, I made a mistake. Just give me I'm going to share the first one. Sorry, I've got too many open. Just give me 1 second. Okay, I'm sharing it now. I've got it open. Gav, hang on. Yeah, all right, I'm sharing it. So what we are saying is these are different amounts that are awarded. The only difference between this diagram and the other diagram is that the principle plays out when different amounts are awarded. The principle doesn't change. Gavin is the original owner, only technically he is not a partner like as in Rabbi Akiva. According to Rabbi Yishmael, he was only negligent to me as the first victim. So he keeps his 100 zuz because he only owed me 200 zuz. Come payment owes me 100 zuz. His money that he owed me as the first victim gets held, and it doesn't get paid to me, Kevin or Arthur or anybody else until we looked at the last person that was damaged. And because he was the most careful, he gets paid what he's owed. If there's anything over, the second to last victim gets paid, and the third to last victim. The only thing the Gemara brought in note number 5, Gavin, is that if the second to last victim would have been awarded from the third to last victim 50 zuz for 100 zuz damage, and his ox created 100 zuz worth of damage to the last victim, whatever he would have gained as a previous settlement, he has to pay out. So he can actually.
But that's because he was awarded. I think he was awarded in this particular in the next example. In this example, he wasn't awarded. That's why he receives the excess. That's what
No. In this first diagram, the last victim happened to have low cost worth of damages. That's the major difference. In other words, he's only got 25 zuz that he has to pay out on a 50 zuz damage, not 50 zuz out of 100 zuz damage. The major difference.
The numbers shouldn't make a difference. Honestly, the principle should be the same. It should either be passed down the line in the excess, second, third, in both drawings, in my opinion, or otherwise the second guy should be skipped out, and it should always go to the guys that have the higher amounts.
You're 100% correct, and that's what I was trying to tell you. The flaw I noticed in note number 5, or my comprehension of note number 5, is it seemed to not be a straightforward pattern. Just let me finish. I'm agreeing with you. Is what I'm saying to you is as follows. Is according to the principle that you brought now, fine. If Gavin as the first owner gives the 100 zuz and the court awards it from the last victim to the second last to third last, and whatever's left trickles down, that I understand. If you want to say that the principle is different, and you're saying the last gets paid in the proper half damages because he never caused any further damage, and then second to last and third to last is awarded where it's looked at from first chronological damage, etc. I can understand that, but the problem is note number 5 contradicts the two, because in the first part of note number 5, exactly as Gavin says, it's saying, look, if there's anything left in the kitty after the last victim, it goes second to last, third to last, until there's nothing left over. And then the second part of note 5 is seeming to say that the last victim gets paid his half payment damages, and if there's anything left, we go back to the first person that was damaged and see in his negligence what he owed the second person that was damaged, and the second person that was negligent owed the third person that was damaged, etc. Which means in the second diagram, and you will note this in Schottenstein number 5, Gavin, I'm not making this up. And if you can figure out a solution, I'm very happy to listen to it.
If you couldn't, I also won't.
No, that's not true. That's absolutely not true.
I'll have a look at note 5.
So what it's saying is that second part of note 5 is saying, look, the last damage, Arthur was owed 100 zuz, okay, as the last victim. And he was awarded full 50 zuz half payment damages because he was careful with his ox. There's 50 zuz left. Now, it should go to Kevin in the trickle-down theory, but it doesn't. Because that 50 zuz owed to Kevin has to pay because he caused 100 zuz worth of damage to the last victim. Okay.
And the last victim he paid twice. That's what doesn't make sense.
He's not paid twice. Let me explain. That's the only thing that...
No, he's skipping the guy. Okay, no, he's not getting paid twice.
He's not getting paid twice.
What I'm saying...
No. Okay, no problem. So let me say this again. Okay, Gav, just give me a second to summarize that. So Arthur got 100 zuz worth of damage from Kevin because Kevin, as the second victim, which is again, Gavin's the original owner. I was damaged by Gavin's ox, so I'm the first victim. Kevin is the second victim, failed to look after his ox and damaged Arthur. Kevin owes Arthur 100 zuz. It's a ton payment. Kevin actually needs to pay Arthur 50 zuz. So fine. We are saying that Gavin actually owes me as the first victim 100 zuz, and I owe Kevin 100 zuz, but because it's half payment damage, it's only 50 zuz. Okay? So let me clear this up. Let me not talk about half payment damages, because this is what's confusing everybody. Gavin, can I eliminate that? That would make the explanation a lot easier. Fine. So, fine. Gavin owes me as the first victim 100 zuz because he never looked after his ox. I seized the ox. I basically damaged and owed Kevin now 50 zuz. Fine. Kevin seized the ox from me, and Kevin basically owes me 50 zuz, by the way, because he's not damaged. I own 100 zuz. I owe Kevin 50. He owes me, Kevin, as the second victim, 50 zuz. Kevin is awarded 50 zuz from me in damages. Kevin damages Arthur for 50 zuz. So whatever Kevin would have got from me, he pays Arthur 50 zuz. Arthur gets paid first because he was the most careful. So Arthur gets the 50 zuz from Kevin. Now, I technically supposed to get 50 zuz from Kevin because I only owed him 50 and my ox is worth 100 and he seized my ox. So Kevin, that extra 50 that's due from Arthur doesn't go to Kevin. It goes to me. That's what the Gemara is saying. I just worked it out.
Okay, I've got it now. I've got it. Thank you, Damon. I've got it. I don't need the other guys. Okay, yeah. I've got it.
Okay. You spoke as well, Damon. So I've got to go now.
Sorry, right. Damon. Sorry, I don't know. I was just...
Damon, you're fantastic. You explained it very well. And
this is how the court case would unravel. It comes April, and the original owner of the ox, the first victim, the second victim, and the third victim goes to court. The court hears the testimony of the original owner, and the original owner owes the first victim, due to his negligence, 100 zuz worth of damage. Okay? So what happens is that the court weighs the attacking ox and determines the attacking ox is worth 200 zuz. Okay? The damage awarded to the first victim is 100 zuz. They give 100 zuz back to the original owner in change from his 200 zuz ox, and they tell him to go home, and he goes home. Fine. There's 100 zuz, but that 100 zuz doesn't automatically go to the victim from the original owner, because it comes out in the court that the first victim wasn't a righteous person. What ended up happening is that he actually seized the ox, which he is entitled to do, by the way, from the original owner, in order to use it as collateral to take it to the court to get a fair share of what he's owed. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, because the original owner could have claimed that the ox that attacked his ox was lost, etc., so he wanted to get paid. But where that first victim was not righteous is he, once he seized the ox, he allowed the ox in his care to damage a second party. And that's where the problem lies. Because when it damaged the second party, the amount that he was meant to collect from the original owner, he doesn't get to keep it entirely, simply because he now has damaged a second person and has to pay the second person his half payment damages for the tum ox, because the ox under his care should have been looked after, and as the custodian of the seized ox, he was negligent. Fine. So the first victim does not automatically get paid from the original owner. the court keeps the money from the original owner of 100 zuz, and it listens to the testimony of the first victim, who said he's owed 100 zuz from the original owner. Fine. They interview the second victim, and they say, well, how did the first victim damage you? He said, well, he owes me 100 zuz, but it's a tame ox that attacked me, so therefore he owes me 50 zuz. And I kidnapped the first victim's ox that was worth 100 zuz in order that I could claim my 50 zuz from the court. So the court says, let me get this straight. We would owe you 50 zuz. Well, the first victim would owe you 50 zuz out of the 100 zuz, and you would have to return the 50 zuz change to the first victim now that you seized his ox. Is that correct? The second victim says that's correct. There's only one problem. The third victim comes to court and says, hang on a second, before you award the second victim any sort of damages, I was damaged by the second victim, because the second victim, in his care, was meant to look after the ox that he seized from the first victim. He did not look after that ox, and that ox killed my 100 zuz ox, and therefore, because it was a tame ox, he owes me 50 zuz worth of damages. And when the court interviews the last victim, the third victim, it said, did your ox damage anybody further under your care? He said, no. He said, I did seize the ox. Arthur, the last victim, he did seize the ox from the second victim. Why did the last victim seize the ox from the second victim? Is because he wanted to get paid his 50 zuz. But the reason why we call him the last victim and not the third victim is that the third victim was careful with his ox that damaged, and it did not damage a fourth victim. Therefore, he's referred to as the last victim. So that third victim was actually a righteous man, a tzaddik, because he made sure that once he seized the ox from the second victim that caused him 50 zuz worth of damage, he created a fence, and he did not allow the ox that he seized to create further damage. So the court said that there's 100 zuz in the kitty that needs to be paid that came from the original owner, and the first person that we're going to pay is, in fact, the third victim, because he's the last victim. Because he was righteous and his ox didn't damage further, he doesn't owe further payments to another party, and therefore what is owed to him is 50 zuz. Correct? The court says correct. So therefore, the last victim is paid his 50 zuz out of 100 zuz damage because it was a tum ox, and is ordered to go home. Fine. The last victim goes home. So all that's left is the second victim and the first victim. The second victim complains to the court and says, no, he should get paid after the last victim, and the court says, not so fast. Let's see what happened. So it interviews, and it comes out as follows, that the first victim that was damaged by the original owner is owed 100 zuz. Under his care, he was negligent, and his ox created 50 zuz worth of damage to the second victim. Fine. So what happens is, the court is about to give that 50 zuz to the second victim that was caused by the first victim, and then the court says to the second victim, your 50 zuz that you were awarded by the first victim has to now go to the third victim. And the reason being is, under your care, second victim, you failed to protect your ox, and your ox, under your care, damaged a third party, and therefore the 50 zuz that you were awarded as the second victim for your damage, you let your ox attack again, and now that 50 zuz has to go to the last victim. The court on your behalf, second victim, has paid the third victim. So there's 50 zuz remaining. So if you were entitled to 50 zuz in terms of damage, and your ox damaged a third party, as you being the second party, worth 50 zuz, whatever you were awarded for the 50 zuz goes in payment of what you owe the third. So that 50 zuz remaining should go to the first victim. And the reason it should go to the first victim is you kidnapped 100 zuz worth of ox in order that you received your 50 zuz. You owed the first victim 50 zuz from your damage. Now you complaining that you lost your 50 zuz awarded to you from the first victim to the third victim. But if you second victim had looked after your ox properly, it never would have damaged a third victim. Therefore, the 50 zuz remaining in the kitty after paying the last victim, the third victim, goes back to the first victim, because the second victim actually owes 50 zuz to the first victim. So what it's saying is the second victim was to be awarded 50 zuz, but because he was negligent and his ox created 50 zuz worth of damage, the 50 zuz he would have got paid ends up getting paid to the damage he caused for the last victim, and he ends up with nothing. So we have a case here where the second to last victim ends up with nothing because his 50 zuz worth of awarded damage goes to pay his 50 worth of zuz damage to the third victim. And the first victim that damaged 50 zuz worth of damage should have been paid from the second victim his 50 zuz change. So the 50 zuz remaining goes back to the first victim. That's how it works. I wish you all a good night, and may Hashem bless all of us, and I thank Hashem for help giving us clarity on the daf.